The return of Tory sleaze, Labour's verdict on the lobbying scandal engulfing the government.
Is there a problem of sleaze in your government, Prime Minister?
Boris Johnson faced Sir Keir Starmer in the Commons today over claims about the influence of former Prime Minister David Cameron.
Dodgy contracts, privileged access, jobs for their mates. This is the return of Tory sleaze.
Well, Boris Johnson insists his investigation will get to the bottom of it, but tonight Parliament opened an inquiry too. Also ahead. A survivor of the Fishmongers Hall terror attack describes the moment she played dead to avoid being stabbed again. Should COVID vaccinations for care workers be compulsory? The government considers proposals. And the never-seen-before pictures of the Duke and the Royals released by the family ahead of his funeral.
This is the ITV Evening News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good evening. There were fiery exchanges in the Commons today over the lobbying scandal threatening to engulf Westminster. As more officials were dragged into the controversy, Labour said David Cameron's actions for the now collapsed firm, Greensill Capital, were the tip of the iceberg and signified a return of Tory sleaze. Boris Johnson claimed his party has been tough on lobbying, but admitted the boundaries between government and business may have been misunderstood. Well, the Prime Minister has already ordered an investigation, but tonight a parliamentary committee launched its own inquiry. Here's our political correspondent, Libby Vina.
The line between government and business, it's meant to be clear and prevent politicians using their contacts and influence for financial gain. But David Cameron's lobbying on behalf of Greensill Capital has raised questions about whether rules were broken or whether they were ever tough enough.
Is there a problem of sleaze in your government, Prime Minister?
Not something he would accept, but he did concede today that perhaps relations had at times got too cosy.
I do think it is a good idea in principle that top civil servants should be able to engage with business and should have experience of the private sector. When I look at the accounts I'm reading today, it's not clear that those boundaries have been properly understood.
For Labour today demanding a full parliamentary inquiry, it was all part of a pattern.
The Greensill scandal is just the tip of the iceberg. Dodgy contracts, privileged access, jobs for their mates. This is the return of Tory sleaze.
But what, if anything, did Boris Johnson know? One backbencher asked.
Will the Prime Minister tell this House when he last spoke to former Prime Minister David Cameron?
The honest truth, I cannot remember when I last spoke to Dave, but I can, if she wants to know whether I've had any contact with him about any of the matters that have been in the press, the answer is no.
This all centres on Lex Greensill, brought into Number 10 by David Cameron as a part-time advisor, but also the founder of a financial services company, Greensill Capital, which bid for government contracts. In 2018, David Cameron, now out of office, became an advisor to the company himself, lobbying ministers and officials on its behalf. It's now emerged that a senior civil servant, Bill Crothers, in charge of government procurement, was working for Greensill at the same time as the government. This former civil servant says that came as quite a shock.
I think everybody was just extremely surprised, a lot of eyebrows raising, because I think particularly when you've got somebody who's running government procurement, that's such a direct and obvious conflict of interest. It's very difficult to see how anyone ever thought that was a good idea.
Tonight, the Cabinet Secretary has asked all civil servants whether they have any outside work to declare. Well, Labour lost that vote demanding a full parliamentary inquiry, but in the last hour, the Treasury Select Committee, which has a Conservative chairman, has announced that it will start looking into the links between Greensill and the government. While there's no suggestion that David Cameron has broken any rules, the fact that he stood to gain millions of pounds from share options if Greensill had not in fact collapsed, does raise very serious questions and still has the potential to make the MP's expenses scandal look like something of a storm in a teacup.
All right, Libby, thank you. A woman has relieved how she repeatedly was stabbed during the Fishmongers Hall terror attack, telling an inquest she played dead to protect herself. Isabel Robotham said moments earlier she saw Jack Merritt clutching his stomach after being stabbed. He was one of 2 people killed by Usman Khan in November 2019. With the latest from the inquest, here's Martha Fairley.
This was Jack Merritt, a former Cambridge University undergraduate, facilitating a 5th anniversary gathering of Learning Together, a prisoner rehabilitation programme. But at the event at Fishmongers Hall in London, he would later be fatally stabbed, along with Saskia Jones, by convicted terrorist Usman Khan, who'd been invited to attend. Amma Otchery, seen here in a black coat, was the housekeeping supervisor at Fishmongers Hall. At the inquest into Jack and Saskia's deaths, she said she went to investigate noises from the gents' toilets. Usman Khan came out with a knife in his hand, signalling to keep quiet. He stabbed a woman next to her in the shoulder and was reciting something in Arabic. The jury heard evidence from Izzy Robotham, who was a student and working part-time for Learning Together at the time of the attack. She was in the foyer of Fishmongers Hall when she saw Jack approaching, shouting he'd been stabbed. To her left, she then saw Usman Khan coming towards her purposefully, with 2 knives in his hands. She told the court he stabbed her repeatedly. I remember his final stabs were in my neck as if they were intending to finish me. I decided to play dead just in case he came back again. I tried to slow down my breathing and blood flow as much as possible. The inquests also heard from City of London Police Constable Kate Langtree and Sergeant Daniel Murphy, walking here side by side. They administered first aid to Jack Merritt, but he had already lost a lot of blood when they arrived. Despite attempts to revive him, he was declared dead just over half an hour after he'd been attacked. The inquests continue tomorrow. Martha Fairley, ITV News.
The government has launched a consultation on whether it should be compulsory for care home staff to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Unions have warned it could result in some staff quitting. Well, our UK editor Paul Brandis says. So, Paul, what's the thinking behind this?
Well, Lucrezia, there's been a debate going on within the sector for months now. What's better, compulsion or persuasion? Because something is needed to get the number of vaccinated care home staff up. Scientists think around 80% need to be vaccinated to provide the minimum protection for older residents from COVID-19. At the moment across England, the average is 78%. Doesn't sound that bad, except there's huge variation across the country. So I've been looking at the figures today. For example, in Lambeth in London, 52% have had the jab, compared to 100% on the Isles of Scilly. So to try and standardise things here, the government's announcing this 5-week consultation on whether it should be compulsory if care workers want to go on shift.
I'm being very clear here. It's not a condition of employment, it's a condition of deployment. In terms of you're coming into contact with very fragile, frail people who, if exposed to COVID, could likely kill them, then it's only right and it's only responsible for us as a government to consult on this.
Well, the unions say this will simply lead to carers leaving the industry. I've certainly spoken to some who are willing to walk away. They don't want the jab, maybe because of the side effects or because of religious or cultural reasons. Care homes themselves are pretty divided on this. Some are already asking staff to get the jab. That could be the case for all carers across the country by as early as the summer.
All right, Paul, thank you. Now, if you were watching last night, you would have seen our housing report where we met cancer patient Julie Roberts. She's been living in a mould-ridden flat in Newquay for 7 years, unable to sleep in her bedroom due to the extreme infestation. Well, there was some good news for her today following our report. The management company which runs the property have offered her a 2-bedroom home to move into by the end of next week. In recent weeks, widespread sexual abuse at schools has been exposed through testimonies on the website Everyone's Invited. But the problem isn't just confined to schools. Data from the website that has been shared with ITV News reveals that in just 1 week, more than 1,000 university students posted their own experiences of sexual assault and harassment. One victim told us that since being attacked, she's never felt truly safe. Rachel Younger has this special report.
Being away from home for the first time should be all about freedom. And for some students, this week feels like a new beginning. But others are living with an old fear, not of the virus, but sexual harassment and worse. Katie, whose identity we're disguising, was sexually assaulted in her first year by another student. When her complaint was made light of, it took the heaviest of tolls.
It's taken virtually my whole university experience. I spent my 3 years at university always looking over my shoulder, and it's taken a toll on my work, definitely, my social life, my mental health, having to be dependent on medication that I never was before just because I couldn't get the support that I needed.
The university and the sports society Katie belonged to finally acted, but by then the damage was done.
I would have to plan to leave the house an hour early to allow time for the anxiety attack I was going to have, knowing that the perpetrator was somewhere on campus. I was terrified. I think there's a lack of understanding on an institutional level for the personal effects that it has on your life.
Katie's experience isn't isolated. In the space of just 1 week, over 1,000 students submitted testimonies of sexual assault and harassment experienced at UK universities. 86 institutions in total, named by the campaign group Everyone's Invited, with the University of Exeter mentioned 65 times, Oxford University cited in 57 accounts, and Edinburgh University in 53. All three of them have told ITV News they are actively tackling violence against women. But for these 4 students studying at London universities, that behaviour is inescapable. Fellow students have stalked them, groped them and even marked them out of 10.
I'm involved in sports societies a lot. I know a lot of them, a lot of men at sports societies keep lists of girls they slept with, and sometimes they rate them as well.
I was walking through the crowd and I just found someone put his hand on my body and I was shocked. I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether to run, whether to scream, whether to stand. I was just completely paralyzed.
I've had similar situations where it's midday and I'm leaving uni and you'll have guys stalk you out of a train and hold on to you. And fine, they're trying to be persistent. They're like, hey, let me get your number, miss, whatever. But the fact that, it's midday and I'm trying to get home safely.
They're fighting back, part of the Our Streets Now movement, determined, like the founder of Everyone's Invited, to expose a hidden culture of abuse that stretches way beyond education.
It's about the sexism, the misogyny, the victim blaming. It's about the deeply entrenched attitudes and beliefs, the sexism that exists at the fabric of our society.
For many women, it's been a difficult few weeks to reflect on. Education may well offer some of the answers, but right now our universities, like our schools, face some big questions. Rachel Younger, ITV News.
The final British troops stationed in Afghanistan are expected to leave the country later this year. That's after the US announced its forces will pull out by September the 11th, 20 years on from the 9/11 attacks. It means troops from other NATO members will likely follow suit. Well, British forces have paid a high price since they were deployed to Afghanistan in 2001. 456 have died fighting in the country, with more than 4,000 physically injured. 7 years ago, the last UK troops serving under the British flag left, with around 750 remaining as part of NATO operations. Now they are set to leave too, as Paul Davis reports.
It was the war where America and her British allies spilt blood, discovering, like others before them, that being a superpower did not guarantee military success in Afghanistan. It began as a response to the 9/11 attacks. Osama bin Laden, the al-Qaeda leader who'd masterminded this, was being sheltered by the Taliban in that lawless country. A dreadful price would be paid. By the time the last Allied soldier is withdrawn, exactly 20 years on September the 11th this year, an estimated 180,000 military and civilians will have died, including more than 450 members of the British force.
Was it worth it? No, it wasn't worth it.
Matt Hellier served with Special Forces and spent 4 tours in Afghanistan. These days he heads a charity looking after veterans, and he recalls the darkest times.
To see the young lads and ladies who were getting hit on a daily basis, and I think the attrition rate was around 1 in 4, similar to that of the First World War. So every patrol that went out, 1 in 4 of those people would probably not be coming back.
Dog handler Liam Tasker was shot by a Taliban sniper after he and his dog Theo had saved countless lives uncovering a record number of booby-trapped devices. His mother Jane says Liam's family and comrades will always feel that loss.
Was it worth it? Because Liam's friends are still suffering now, 10 years later. It's sad, really sad. And I don't think the public realise just the effect it has on the families and the soldiers.
The Kabul government is already a target for suicide bombings and assassinations. When American forces withdraw, taking their allies with them, observers predict more violence.
Straight back into civil war, with the Taliban being very much on the winning side of that civil war.
A sorry epitaph for a mission that was intended to restore law and order to a troubled part of the world. Paul Davis, ITV News.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, Princess Anne's poignant visit on her first royal engagement since her father's death, and
the game changers are history makers.
From the underdogs to national heroes, Northern Ireland's inspirational footballers. But first, ITV News has learned that a court has ordered Uber to reinstate 6 drivers who were dismissed for fraud and pay them damages. A union said the drivers were fired automatically by the company's algorithm without any checks. They took their case to a court in the Netherlands, home to Uber's European headquarters, where Uber claims it didn't even know about the hearing and will contest the outcome. Our business editor Joel Hills has the story.
Uber's great asset is its technology. The company's app uses algorithms to connect its 70,000 drivers in the UK with customers and to set prices. What happens if the app makes a mistake?
I've lost all my income because of what they did to me.
Abdi Fattah Abdallah was fired by Uber in September last year after the app detected 2 attempts to access his account from 2 different devices in 2 locations that were far apart. Uber accused him of sharing his account. He insists he didn't. He not only lost his job with Uber, Transport for London revoked his private hire licence too.
When they shut you down everywhere, then you feel like you're in a dark place, right? There's nothing that you can do because you are hopeless. You're helpless.
Uber's European business is headquartered in Amsterdam. The app drivers and couriers union took legal action against the company here on behalf of Abdi Fattah and 5 other drivers. The union claims they were all fired by Uber's computer algorithm. Uber didn't contest the case, and in its absence, the court in Amsterdam issued a default judgment, which states the dismissals were based solely on automated processing, that the 6 drivers should be reinstated, and that Uber should pay fines and compensation of €150,000. In a statement, Uber explains that it didn't contest this case because it only realised it existed last week. The company says this was because the union's solicitor failed to follow proper legal procedure. Uber says the default judgment was automatic and not considered, and it intends to challenge it. Uber uses technology to keep its platform safe. Facial recognition software and location data is deployed to authenticate its drivers. Uber wouldn't tell us how many drivers have been fired for failing real-time ID checks since they were introduced last year. But the company insists no one is deactivated without a human examining an automated decision.
People want to grow up and raise their families in a way that feels secure, and if people can just be thrown on the scrap heap because of an algorithm, then actually that really does put people in peril.
Artificial intelligence has enormous potential and is playing an increasingly prominent role in the workplace, in the gig economy in particular. Companies like Uber are under pressure to be more transparent about what data they collect and how it's used. John Hills, ITV News.
Northern Ireland's First Minister Arlene Foster has told a court that unfounded allegations of an extramarital affair have been very distressing for her and her family. The DUP leader was giving evidence during a libel hearing at the High Court in Belfast. She's suing TV presenter Dr. Christian Jessen for defamation after he shared the rumours on Twitter. The disgraced financier Bernie Madoff, who swindled thousands of clients out of billions of dollars, has died in prison aged 82. He was jailed for orchestrating the largest Ponzi scheme in history. Slavia Prague footballer Andre Kadela has been banned for 10 matches for racially abusing Rangers player Glenn Kamara. The incident happened during a Europa League match last month. And a section of beach in Dorset remains cordoned off following a huge cliff fall near Weymouth. It's the biggest rockfall seen on the Jurassic Coast in 60 years. New photos of the Duke of Edinburgh with members of the royal family have been released ahead of his funeral. They include one taken by the Duchess of Cambridge of him and the Queen with 7 of their great-grandchildren at Balmoral. Well, it came as senior royals returned to official duties just days after Prince Philip's death. Well, here's our royal editor, Chris Shipp.
It is rare to see the Queen and Prince Philip in an intimate setting like this and surrounded by so many of their great-grandchildren. This photo, released in the last hour, was taken at Balmoral in 2018 by the Duchess of Cambridge. It has never been seen before. Other family images released tonight show the Duke of Edinburgh with William and Kate shortly after Princess Charlotte was born. And this one at a polo match in 1966 was released by Prince Charles. It was a day to remember the family man.
And Prince Philip's speedboat rip-roaring into the picture with Prince Charles aboard.
Sailing in general and sailing on the Solent in particular were some of Prince Philip's most loved passions, and his love of the sea and family trips on it were remembered by his daughter today at a place her father loved to be. It was why the Queen said she still wanted Princess Anne to fulfil her engagement on the Isle of Wight today, despite officially being in the 2-week royal mourning.
The early memories, this was days out, which were great fun.
Both the Queen and her daughter recognise how many times Prince Philip had been here for the Cowes Week regatta. But the Princess Royal did acknowledge that her father had high standards when it came to sailing in his favourite boat, Cowslip. Her father, she said, thought that she was too young.
I was considered, I think, too young and a bit of a nuisance.
And on the drill square of the Purbright Barracks in Surrey today, the men and women from the Army, Navy and RAF kept up their rehearsals ahead of Saturday's funeral at Windsor Castle. It has been hugely scaled back because of the pandemic, but more than 700 personnel are still taking part, and they know what the Duke of Edinburgh would have expected from them. It will be a family funeral first, but one so many across the nation and the world will be watching. Chris Shipp, ITV News.
Well, there's been a touching reunion at a care home in Mansfield where an elderly couple were able to see each other for the first time in months.
Don't hit me.
Gordon and Mary had been separated during the pandemic, but Gordon couldn't bear to be away and surprised her by moving to the same care home, which meant finally they were allowed that long-awaited hug. And finally, the part-time footballers who are off to the Euros. Short on practice and missing key players, Northern Ireland's women shocked Ukraine last night to qualify for their first ever major tournament. Now it's hoped their underdog story will inspire the next generation, as Sejal Carrier reports.
The game changers are history makers.
It was a victory that seemed beyond reach, beyond hope and beyond belief. And so it was one to savour.
Nobody gave them a hope.
Last night, Northern Ireland women became trailblazers by reaching the Euro 2022 finals, their first ever major tournament, beating Ukraine over 2 legs and earning a place in the history books. And just look at what it meant.
To be part of that first group, to go to a major tournament was always the dream, and you know, here we are, and it's just phenomenal.
It caps a remarkable 17-year journey for a team that only reformed in 2004 and are currently ranked 49th in the world, 25 places below their Ukrainian opponents, who they beat 2-0 last night, winning the tie 4-1 on aggregate.
Well of a future in the full-time game.
Captain Marissa Callahan scoring the first goal in the 55th minute.
Is this the icing on the cake? Caldwell!
Substitute Nadine Caldwell finishing off the job deep in injury time.
Northern Ireland. We had Wales and Norway as the first 4 games. I'm going to be honest, like we almost wrote ourselves off because we're like, we've got the 4 hardest games at the start of the campaign. Do you know, it's just been an incredible journey the last 18 months, and yeah, this is what happens when you have people believe in you.
And the impact of this win is being felt far and wide, not least on the pitch of the grassroots game, where young female players are daring to dream big.
To see these girls who come from the same place that I do to get so far, it's just a huge inspiration. I can't even explain how much it means.
But it's this team that have defied the odds and are blazing that trail for others to follow. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
Oh, lots of celebrating. Good luck to them. That is all for now. Tom will be here with news at 10, but for me and the rest of the team, have a very good evening. Bye-bye.